Welcome back to another episode of the Decision Hour. I'm your host, Adam Bird. Happy New Year. It's 2025, and this is the first episode of the new season. And I'm excited about this episode because I have a very special person, someone who I consider very special in my life. She is an inspiration to many, many people. And she has an incredible story that we're going to learn a little bit today. She's an award-winning Amazon best-selling author of a book titled Bump in the Road. It's 15 stories of courage, hope, and resilience. She's also a speaker, a pilot, a podcaster, and an acclaimed photographer. My friend, Pat Wetzel. Pat, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
Absolutely. First off, thank you. I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to thank you for your friendship. Every time that we get on a call, I so much enjoy. I learn a lot from you, and I enjoy our conversations. And with that being said, I want to dive into this a little bit right now, and let's tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Wow. That could be a mouthful.
A loaded question, right? I know.
Well, let's see. The quick overview. Graduated from school, from Wharton Business School, went to work in New York financial circles in the bond market and then later in strategic planning, international strategic planning. Got married, moved to Connecticut, got sick, very sick, with a disease called myasthenia gravis, which is a very rare neurologic disease, and it causes muscle weakness. So things like speaking, swallowing, breathing become difficult. Had some surgery, was on medication, and over about a 10-year period of time, really got much better. Got divorced. My whole world fell apart at that point. I lost my ex-in-laws, who I loved dearly, and we had just moved to a new place. I didn't have any sort of social network. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I think of this period of my life as life wish, death wish, and a reintroduction to adventure. Because my life for the last 10 years had been dealing with life, death, disease.
Yeah.
And when the divorce went through, or in the process, I took off on a trip cross country, just flew to some different places, visited some friends. And when I got to San Francisco, I rented a white Mustang convertible. Put the top down, right? Sunny day, breeze blowing through your hair, the perfect vineyards. And this was back around 89 or so. And at that point in time, wine country wasn't quite as glitzy as it is today. Right. So I got up to Calistoga, which was kind of run down, actually. And their biggest point was mud baths, which didn't sound too appealing. But in the middle of town, there is an airport that intersects the main street at a right angle. So like this, the airport comes right into the main street.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's kind of weird, don't you think? So I went down and checked it out, and they were giving glider rides. So I went for a ride. I didn't think anything of it. Went back east and tried to pull my destroyed life back together again. But I had run into somebody who mentioned 3 lawyers who were flying gliders on weekends. So I decided, really out of the blue, to invite myself out over a 3-day weekend. I flew for 3 straight days, and I was hooked, absolutely hooked. And that introduction to aviation changed everything about my life.
Okay, I got okay. So, and you think as long as I've known you, like you told me bits and pieces of that, I didn't realize this is great. So now I got a question is, so you flew for the 3 days, and that was your introduction to aviation. For those listening that are have thought about getting into the aviation side of things, is it hard to get into that? And is there a difference between getting like license as for gliders as there is opposed to other fixed wing aircraft?
Yes, there's a significant difference with gliders. The medical is more lenient.
Oh, really?
I lied through my teeth to get that medical. I did. I went, in aviation circles, you always hear about the doctor you want to have do your physical, right?
Oh, of course, yeah.
So it's fun everywhere.
Yeah.
So I heard about this guy, and I made an appointment. And it turns out he's a pathologist who lives in the bowels of the hospital. So you go down, 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 like into these caverns, and you go to his office, which my best recollection is that it was freezing cold, probably so the cadavers wouldn't rot as fast. And there were these huge, I remember them as being concrete tables all over this big room. And all I could think of is I'm sitting on this table of death in order to live, in order to fly.
Yeah.
It was just a bizarre experience. But he got to one point and he asked me, "Do you have any defining scars or anything like that?" And I have a big scar right down my chest from the surgery from the myasthenia. They take out your thymus in the hopes that it will make you better. They don't really know for sure. At any rate, I was there thinking, "Oh my God," as I'm thinking, what am I going to say to this question? And so finally I said, "No, none at all." Whereupon I'm holding my breath. I'm smiling at him, batting my eyes because it's obvious he does this because he's incredibly lonely. And finally he signs off and I have my medical.
So, so that was the start then of getting your license as a pilot. I mean, what was the or what am I trying to say? How long was that process? How long did that process take? Or was it you got cleared and then here you got to learn some instruments and you're off?
You have a fair amount to learn, actually. You have to pass the written exam, the FAA written exam.
Okay.
You
Okay.
have to demonstrate proficiency in a variety of situations.
Yeah.
So there's a reasonable amount you have to learn. And then you get signed off and you can go and get your official pilot's license. For me, learning to fly with that group was just the beginning because I showed up, Sam, who was a World War II naval aviator. Was my flight instructor, okay? And I knew I was doing really well when I could hear Sam snoring in the back.
Nice.
Well, Sam had two other little single-seat planes called 126s, and they're kind of a cult plane in the sailplane community. He had one of them weighed and balanced for me, so I could just show up at the airport, do a quick pre-flight, and I'd be off. It was wonderful. So I showed up at the airport one Saturday and my quote unquote, my plane wasn't there. And it turned out it had been committed to an air show. I was furious. I was so angry. It was the most perfect day. I mean, this is the mid-Atlantic. You get two perfect days a year. This was one of them.
Yeah.
And I couldn't fly. So I'd heard some other pilots on the radio, and I'd heard about a club an hour south, and they were flying these really high performance planes and going to contests and all this sort of thing. So I decided I'm going to go down and check it out. So I got directions and I go down and I find the airfield. And at the entrance, there's a huge sign that says, "Go away. We do not want you here." And at the time, that went triple for any women who wanted to fly.
Oh, wow.
So I ignored the sign. I pulled in and I'd stepped into an alternate universe. There were all these beautiful white fiberglass planes, high performance planes, lining the tarmac, being taking off in shifts between two tow planes. It was just phenomenal. And I asked what's involved in joining, and I gave him a check, and that was that. Except it wasn't that, because in order to fly with them, I needed my own plane. So that started a quest for a plane, and I ended up with a plane with a pedigree that was built for Carl Streetic to fly in the Worlds. And the joke was, of course, that this plane was being put out to pasture with me, which was partially true. But it was an extraordinary plane. Our contest letters were Whiskey Oscar, and this plane flew like no other plane I've ever flown. I've flown different 20s and planes in the same class as she was. Oh my gosh, what a plane. She was just so sweet. The wings were super flexible. I could balance the entire plane on the winglet at the end of the wing and just balance on a bubble of air and rise through the sky. It was amazing.
How many flight hours do you have as a pilot?
I have altogether almost 3,000, but about
Wow.
600 of that is power, which I don't really count.
That is, and I gotta ask just because I've told you offline I'm kind of an aviation nerd myself. Although I
Welcome to the
I just love it. I just find flying fascinating. What, how many places around the world have you flown? Or in
Um,
in the states, how many have you? How many different states have you flown in or flown?
oh, I would have to sit down and look at a map to tell you
Oh
because
wow,
flights go hundreds of miles sometimes. So you go through multiple states.
wow. So
Yeah,
you've
the
literally
essence of cross country flying is essentially a racing sport. And it's either a race against time, a race around a predetermined path,
yeah.
a race for distance, or a race maybe for altitude.
See, this just goes to show, and I know there's somebody out there that's listening to this right now. You know, we're talking about, flying these amazing, gliders and not gliders. They're sailplanes. I believe that's the correct terminology for it. Is that correct?
That's what we call them in the community, but
Yeah.
I'm finding people understand a glider.
So on the gliders, I think back of like there's a couple places outside of Phoenix, Arizona that I know of
Yeah.
that do it, and we were always under the impression that like when we were out there, we're in that area, you just see them kind of flying around that area, and then they would land same area where they took off. I never thought, and this is the ignorant side of me, is that you could just take off in one of these sailplanes and then go cross country with it,
Oh,
you know. And I think that's cool because I can only imagine just you're up there just gliding, just sailing across, and it's just I don't know. I would assume that it's relatively quiet, but
it's silent. You can turn off. You have an audio variometer. You can turn that or any other instrumentation off. But the essence is you find lift, you run for a while,
yeah,
and as you get lower, you start looking for lift again.
I love it. I love it. What now that you've done that, let's move on from the gliding side of things. What else has Pat done?
Let's see. Pat took her plane across the country without knowing a soul and relocated to Lake Tahoe from Pennsylvania to Lake Tahoe. Um,
Now I got to ask, was that like you got a map on your wall and you just take a dart and you throw it and that's where you ended up, or was there thought process behind going to Lake Tahoe?
oh, there was probably a perverted thought process in that on the eastern side of the Sierras, there's an airport called Minden. It's in Nevada. And Minden, Nevada is one of the best places in the world to soar.
Ah, okay.
Not only because they're north-south mountain ranges that heat up. On a good day, an extremely good pilot, I would not put myself in that category, but an extremely good pilot could go from Minden to the Mojave and back.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So there's tremendous lift. There's also wave at Minden. I think the record for flying wave is over 50,000 feet or so. I know getting over 30,000 is really not hard on a good wave day.
Wow. My goodness. So Pat goes from Pennsylvania to Lake Tahoe.
I like Lake Tahoe a lot more.
Yeah. I would reckon so. How long were you in Tahoe?
Um, Almost 20, about 20 years altogether. Look, between Tahoe and Southwest Reno,
Yeah.
about 20 years.
And then from there,
I sold my house and went traveling.
just like in a car where you just like pick spots and you're just going flights, trains. I would think of trains, planes, automobiles.
All the above.
Yeah.
All the above. Yeah, what happened was actually I'd been through 6 years of cancer treatment. And as a result of that, I had a little startup that was designed to keep people connected through periods of long-term illness. Because what happens when people get sick, say with a cancer diagnosis,
Hmm.
at first everybody's there. They want to help, they want to do what they can. But as time goes on, people drop off simply because they have their own lives to attend to, and they really don't know what to do or say when you're dealing with cancer.
Right.
It's scary. It's an existential issue for them. So if you go through this for 6 years, like I did, everybody has dropped away at that point. The people I played tennis with didn't want to play tennis with me because I couldn't play because I was sick. Yeah, I didn't play as well. And everybody had dropped away. And I found that my experience was a little extreme, but the overall experience was actually very mainstream. And what came out of it was a sense that people with long-term illness or disability really need social connection.
Yeah.
So I looked at a variety of techniques using gamification, some community building techniques and rewards and other things, put together a proposal and pitched it to several investor groups, including a group in San Francisco. And I got some positive feedback. They said, come back with a beta version, and give us some data. So I hired a company to do the programming. I don't program or anything. And this company included a number of high-end executives, including one gentleman who sat on the board of two publicly traded companies. Well, they never provided my platform for me, but they did take all my intellectual property. They registered it with the US Patent Office as their own, and they essentially said, sue us. It was utterly intentional on their part. So at this point, I have $40,000 or more of legal bills. I'm realizing this is probably not how I want to spend the next 3 years of my life after my lawyers explained to me that it would cost in increments of $500,000. It would take at least 3 years of my life, and there was no guaranteed outcome. So I was just disgusted with everything. And going through this, I was under so much stress that my hair started falling out again. I was vomiting blood. So I went to see the oncologist who was like, we can run $100,000 of super expensive, uncomfortable tests and we'll find something. Don't worry. And at that point, I'm like, I just don't think so. I've been through this for 6 years. I don't think I can do this anymore. So I just said, screw it. If the past is indicative of the future, I have 2 years. So I'm just gonna go. I don't know where I'm going or anything else. I just need a real change of pace and scenery. So I sold my house and I put my perfect house. This was a gorgeous house. Put everything in storage and hit the road. And I started a blog, Cancer Road Trip. The blog led to photography, which and led to writing, which led to some awards, which led to the idea for a film project. What I wanted, I considered myself lucky to be able to travel like this. It's kind of an indulgent way to deal with difficulty. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice if other people could do something like this? So I put together a proposal for a film project. And the idea being every quarter, we'd take 7 people, give them an unbelievable trip to an iconic location, and tell their story against the backdrop of these geographically amazing places. The first stop was Tanzania, where we would have Kilimanjaro and the metaphor of a mountain, safari and the metaphor of survival, Zanzibar and the spice of life. So I had commitments, not cash in hand, but tentative commitments for about $1 million. And it was 2020. Travel stopped.
God.
Yeah. And that is how Bump in the Road came to be.
Jeez.
I had no idea what to do. So I started a podcast when I didn't know anything about podcasts or how to do them or any of the technology or how to distribute it. But I'm going into my 4th year now, and my next book is coming up soon.
All right. So let's back up because you said a lot there, and I want to back up. I want to back up to where the cancer side of it. Can I ask what type of cancer it was?
Yeah, lymphoma, actually, nodal marginal zone lymphoma.
Okay. And
lymphoma is complicated. There are about, I think, over 60 subtypes.
And I'm assuming now that everything is you're in is it remission? I think that's the right word.
Remission is probably a good word. I quite honestly have stopped going to doctors. I mean, if I feel really sick, maybe I'll go see somebody, but
Yeah.
I have excellent health habits. I am really conscious about about meditating, about good food, about sleep, about exercise. My exercise is a little off in the winter, but I'm conscious of what it takes to put together a healthy lifestyle, and I make it a priority to do it.
Folks, yeah, I told you she's an inspiration to many, right? You guys heard me say that at the beginning of the show. I love it, Pat. I love it. You started the blog. I want to talk about the blog a little bit. You mentioned the blog being like with the travel and stuff like that. Can we elaborate and talk a little bit? Are you still doing the blog right now?
No, I'm not. It's still up. It's called Cancer Road Trip,
Okay.
cancerroadtrip.com. I used it to transition some of the early podcasts over. So some of the early podcasts are on that site too. Then I moved everything to Bump in the Road into its own website. But it was really good for me because I always enjoyed writing, and it was a concerted project concerted effort in a project to write at least weekly.
Yeah.
And it turned into a travelogue.
I love it. I love it. Let's talk about bump in the road. That's kind of how I was introduced to you was bump in the road. What you mentioned that it's a podcast, and we'll get into that here in just a second. But what does bump in the road mean, Pat? What is bump in the road?
When I look back over my life, I wish I'd had some guidance. How in the world do you navigate this stuff?
Right.
I mean, nobody tells you anything about navigating some of the bumps I've had.
Right.
And I know I'm not unique or alone. Everybody has bumps of some severity. Um, so I became really intrigued by how other people manage their bumps in the road. And that was the genesis of the podcast. Now it's moved a little, it has stayed true to that original intent, but I think it's become a little more spiritual over time. Um, and it's just been an amazing experience for me in that I have met the most amazing people through Bump. It's incredible.
Yeah. And for those of you that are listening to this right now, Pat's podcast can be found on really in every platform that you listen to podcasts. You can also find it on our parent network, Heroes Media Group, as well. And then you want to go to if you're listening to this, you're already on the internet. So open up another browser and go to bumpintheroad.us. Bumpintheroad.us. That's Pat's website. Go check it out right now. And other than the podcasts, which I'll get into again just a little bit, I want to set that aside for just a second. You have a book, and you mentioned you write with the blog and stuff like that. But you have a book. Can we talk about the book or should I say books?
Yeah, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about them.
Um, the first book, Bump of the Road, is a compilation of 15 stories. I tell some of my flying stories in there because each chapter has a major theme. So I pull a flying story out that coordinates with that theme. And I do that partly just to introduce myself to my audience because who is this woman? Nobody knows me. Um, but the reason I wrote the book was I was just so bowled over by the incredible stories I was hearing from people.
Yeah.
And I thought this has to go out in numerous forms. Some people read, some people watch, some people listen. It needs to be out there in a book format. And as time has gone on, I mean, I can do a series of bump books, Bump in the Road Business, Bump in the Road Cancer, Bump in the Road, whatever. There's so many stories to tell. But the next book is about Bump in the Road Strong Women and the psychology of living a really good life.
Now, when is that? Do you have a published date for that, or when can people expect that?
I'm aiming for September.
Okay.
That's a fluid date though at the moment. Certainly by the end of this year.
Okay. I love it. And I want to go back to the podcast real quick. First, let me before I say that. Again, open up another browser, go to bumpintheroad.us. That's Pat's website. They can order the book Bump in the Road from the website currently, yes?
Yeah, it's on Amazon actually.
Okay. It's on
The
Amazon.
website will link you over to Amazon.
Yeah. So link it so you can find it on Amazon, or you can go to her website. You see it, click on it, and it'll take you to the Amazon or her Amazon page. Excuse me, over there. The podcast. I want to get back into the podcast because you've had some. I love the stories that you tell. I love the way that you interview. I thought I was fairly good at interviewing, and then watching you and listening to your show is so fascinating. Some of the guests that you have had on. One of my most recent favorite ones you've had on, she was I can see her face, I can't think of the name, Thunderbird pilot.
Oh yeah.
Pilot. And I was just like, wow. And you have on some truly amazing guests, and it's just, do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite of 2024? I'll ask that.
Well, Carolyn Jensen is the Thunderbird pilot that you mentioned.
Carolyn, yes.
Just a remarkable person. Wow. Yeah. I mean, just wow. I can't pick, they're all my favorite in a different way.
Yeah.
I think that for me, one of the most inspirational of all time was Eric Weinmayer. Eric went blind at 16 and went on to climb Everest, the seven summits,
Yeah.
and kayak the Colorado River Rapids solo.
So, it's,
What do you say? And he's such a wonderful person.
yeah.
He was actually one of the early guests on my show. And I thought, why is he coming on this new little podcast? He was so generous.
I love it. Pat, I love your show. And now, is it a weekly for the listeners out there that want to check it out? Is it a weekly show? How often do you put shows out, and what days is there a specific day that you put out an episode?
It has been weekly, but now I'm actually trying to put out two podcasts a week. I have a kind of a backlog and inventory right now.
Hmm.
So I'm aiming for two publication dates a week, and they tend to be Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. And then the best way to follow that actually is through my Substack because I send out a notification. It's bumpintheroad.substack.com. I send out a notification when there's a new episode, and I also write. I love Substack because it really encourages writing. So I write about a whole variety of things, and it's really been fun.
I love it. I love it. Check out our Substack page as well, folks, and we're gonna have that in all the show notes below this here. Pat, I got one more question for you. You're on a show called The Decision Hour. We got to make decisions every day. Name a time in your life where your feet are on the line and you have to make that decision. What is it? And tell the listeners what the atmosphere was like at that time.
A flying story, of
I
course.
love
I'm at a race. I have this new wonderful plane, but I don't know how to fly it, right? I've moved through the terror of getting into it the first time. It's a single seat plane. Nobody can tell me how to do this.
Okay.
And I survived. So I'm going to racing camp to learn to fly fast. Now, learning to fly fast is not as easy as you think. It can be hard. It was hard for me. And go to racing camp, and we're supposed to be, there are three of us. We're one guy who flies on the world team and two other pilots. I was one of the other pilots. And we made plans and we're going to do this and that. Well, we launch and we're supposed to rendezvous, and the third guy never shows up. So it's me and Chip. Chip takes off. He goes so fast, he leaves me in the dust. I'm utterly by myself, and I have no idea where I am. This is in the pre-GPS days. So I'm flying, and the day goes on. I'm flying for, some hours, and the day just gets still, like nothing is moving. And I'm getting lower and lower and lower, and I cannot find lift anywhere. And I'm coming in over this residential neighborhood, and I'm realizing I am in trouble here. I'm looking around for any place where I might be able to land. And keep in mind, I'm fairly new to this plane, which didn't exactly help my anxiety level. And I found a school, and the school had a black tar roof. So I thought maybe, just maybe, that black roof is going to heat up enough to pop a thermal. There are no soccer fields where I'd hoped to land. There's a little football arena, but it has, seating all the way around it and goalposts. And I'm looking at that like there's no way I can get in there and land at my current level of skill. I am screwed. What am I going to do? So I go in over the black top, the black roof, and I turn really tight to just see what the air is doing. And I lose like 45 feet. I'm like, this is not good. I make another circle and my altitude holds. So I'm thinking, okay, it holds. It's not sinking. I'm just going to stay here as long as it holds because I have no place to go anyway. So 30, 40, 50 minutes go by and I'm just grinding around over this high school roof, and down in the parking lot, the kids are down there and they're waving. I'm like, oh my God, why am I doing this to myself? After 40, 50 minutes, all of a sudden, I feel a little instability in the air, and the plane starts to rise. And I was too terrified to move. So I just kept it exactly where it was. I wasn't going to try to recenter the thermal or anything.
Yeah.
And I rode that up to 6,000 feet. And I breathed for the first time in almost an hour and turned the radio back on. I turned it off to focus on flying. And I heard half a dozen other voices asking where I found the lift because everybody was in the same situation.
Oh, wow.
So I guess the point of the story is don't be stupid like I was. But also hang tough. You'll be surprised what you have inside in you. And patience sometimes is the name of the game.
I love it, Pat. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Fun as always.
I love it. I love it. Folks, make sure, again, go check out Pat's website, bumpintheroad.us. Until next time, you've been listening to The Decision Hour.